Install the best version of you.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Hi there.
I swear to God, I don't know what I'm doing here. I was just looking at all these things and I'm like, I'm so old. But I have to tell you that I should come because the first time when I've met Dragoș Stanca, it was many years ago, and he was the publisher for a women magazine. And the first time when we've met, he was just looking in my eyes and he said, Andreea, you have to understand that I am the boss here. So since then, when he's calling me and he's asking me to do something, he's like, I'm the boss here. So the boss told me to come, so I came. But when I tried to read your book, I just wrote on the paper because I still have paper and a pen. So I wrote on the paper some reasons that I shouldn't be here with you today. So first of all, I'm an old-fashioned journalist, and I'm working in the same place, and I'm doing the same thing like for almost 30 years now, like a classic newsroom, you know, the old television station, yeah? And then I was educated to own and not to rent, and you're just telling us in your book that we have to rent and not to own. And I'm, as Jeff would say, fucking scared about everything that is iCloud or something that I cannot see and I cannot touch. So that's the reasons I shouldn't be. But then I found some reasons that maybe it's good that I'm here. And first, you said in your book that now we don't need any 5-year plans. So here I am in trend because I've never had even a 5 days plan. So that's good. And then you're talking about disruption. And I found out that I'm a disruptor. And you know why? Because in an era when everything is going digital, I'm printing a magazine. So I thought maybe it's nice to publish and to print something in an era where everybody is online. So maybe it's okay that I'm here. So here I am. And the first question is very personal because I have this opportunity to talk with you, and I will take advantage about this. So the first question is, what is going on with television? Do I still have something to do in like 10 or 15 years? Because I'm planning to retire from this in like 15 years. I would like to know if television is still something, or what should I do not to be disrupted very, very, very big time?
So, okay, so there's about 15 questions embedded in
exactly.
there.
Exactly.
On the television side, I think what happens is we still have a huge attraction towards the media. It still generates a huge amount of dollars of advertising. And if you put something on TV, somehow everybody's seen it. And so there's still a magical draw there. What I would do is you don't know when it's going to hit that cliff. Right? Network TV is hitting that cliff right now in an interesting way. So I would do that, but at the same time, have Instagram going over here.
I have this.
So then you do both.
That's okay.
Right? And over time, we'll turn the whole thing into Instagram TV, and you can seamlessly move from one to the other.
But what about the teams? Do you think that we'll still have this newsroom like it was before, or everybody's going to, I don't know, to work from some other place in the world for a crew that is somewhere?
I think it'll drop dramatically. Again, you don't know when that's going to happen. But the really important thing that I think is really critical is that we are losing the business model around investigative journalism today. And that's a hugely dangerous place, because if you don't have journalism in its pure form and investigative journalism, you don't have freedom. And so that's a massive issue for society globally, is how do we create a business model around that, whether it's government supported or advertising supported or subscription supported. We need to figure that out.
In your famous TED Talk like 3 years ago, you said that any big organization is having an immune system that attacks and destroys innovation. Do you feel any improvement? Do you think that nowadays it's different?
No. And I don't mean it in it's not a moral question. The problem is the control framework needed to run a big company is by definition the immune system. And therefore, you try and get anything done in a big company, you have to get all these clearances and all these layers have to say yes and all these approvals. And fundamentally, decision-making becomes very slow. And because of that, the metabolism is too slow. Jack Welch, who's the head of GE, wrote in an annual report that the minute your metabolism is slower than the outside world, you're dead. The only question is when. And now I would argue that almost all big organizations, the metabolism is so slower than the outside world. All the advantage today rests with startups. The only place where big companies can survive is where there's heavy regulation, like financial services or healthcare. And even that's a moat that's dropping quickly. Over time, it will not sustain.
You say that democracy is broken and marriage is broken. So what is still working?
What's still working? We have, the big question in society is how do you extract the promise of technology without the peril, right? The good versus the bad. I can use fire to heat my home and I can use it to burn down your home and I can choose. We've done a pretty good job of it. And actually, I'm basically very optimistic about the world. And there's a really interesting data point as to why. As we explode the amount of technology in the world, a good question as we democratize is, will people do good things or bad things with those technologies? Because you can choose. So there's now several systems in the world like eBay, Craigslist, and others, where I can just as easily do a constructive transaction as a fraudulent one. Right? I can pretend to sell you a MacBook, I get 1,000 euros, and I'm off on a beach. I can mask my email address pretty well. So sociologists and anthropologists have now studied these systems and said, okay, a human can equally do good or bad. What's the actual ratio? And after studying these systems in quite a bit of detail, it's kind of an amazing result. The ratio turns out to be something like 8,000 to 1. So on eBay, there are 8,000 positive transactions to each negative. So if you apply that to generally, when we have something like drones, we should say, let anybody do what they want with drones. We'll get a huge number of positive applications, and you only have to police the negative. But today, what we do is we say, ban all drones, which a bad guy is not going to listen to anyway, and we stop all the good innovation, and we just end up in the same place. So we've got a very big problem with the mindset of how we deal with technology today.
So what do you say is that technology is doing more positive things and we don't have to
by
think
far,
about
yeah, by far, by millions and millions of times.
You're talking also about marriage. That was strange. And I just wanted to ask you if you have a solution, or do we have to think in a different way to our marriages?
I would do the following. I heard something very encouraging yesterday from one of the European commissioners.
He was married.
No, it's not about marriage. The idea was that if you create a law or a contract, put an end date on the law. Have legislation have an expiry date, because legislation is not intended to last forever. It's supposed to last as long as it needs to, and then you should be forced to reevaluate it. What if you said as a marriage, we're going to do 5-year terms, we're going to be married for 5 years, but after 5 years the marriage dissolves, we have to decide to remarry or not.
Okay, so
and
now
so
you know
do
the
things,
solution.
there's mechanism. But the way we're taught is you should be married, you should get married, and you should never divorce ever, ever, ever. And that makes no sense in today's world that's moving very quickly.
That's as scary as iCloud.
That's up to you. That's how you deal with it.
Okay, you launched your book, Exponential Organizations, today in Romania too. And I just wanted you to tell to all these people, why should they buy this book?
Well, you can just copy it if you're in Romania and read it. But the reason to read the book, I'll talk about reading rather than buying. And a huge thanks to Lucian for writing the foreword, a very kind foreword he put in there, is that it fundamentally teaches you that we're building businesses and organizations in a totally new way. And we've been doing this now for about 10 years. In fact, we now frame it that in the future, you will not build a startup, you'll build an exponential organization. All organizations will be built in this way in the future because it's just incredibly 10 times more effective as an organization structure. And so that's the reason to think about it. At least know about the model, and you can choose whether you want to use it or not.
Do you think only young people can change and transform disruption in a positive thing?
Yes, for the
why?
most part, yes, because their brains are less calcified. If you're older, your brain, if it's the same, I'll use a different analogy that doesn't go into the age thing. When you start off as a young child, your brain is very open. Then we start going to school and you narrow and you narrow. Then you do a master's degree and you narrow. Then you do a PhD in biology and you're studying one neuron channel in a worm for 7 years. Okay? You have no ability to think generally if you do a PhD. And therefore, your brain is too structured and too stuck. And all of the really creative geniuses in the world don't have a college education. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, etc., you name it. And so you need to unlearn old structures in order to do things disruptively today. And because half the problem in today's world is we have to unlearn. If you think about the business world today, we've done 50, 80 years of organizing big corporations in a particular way. So if you have an MBA, you have to unlearn everything that you learned, because every MBA program in the world teaches you how to build a 20th century organization. Note that there's not a single MBA program in the world that can teach you how to build Uber. So you have to, if you go to MBA school, you have to unlearn that and then relearn it. If you're old, the experiences that were useful to you when you're young don't apply to the next generation.
But
in fact, if you have kids less than 12 years old, they're a different species. They're not even human, right? They're naturally native digitally with technology in a way that we totally can't conceive of. The worst thing we could do to them is say, I went through this, therefore you should go through this.
But what should a big company do to adapt to all these changes then?
So what you do is you leave the mothership and do incremental innovation in the mothership, take the crazy people in your organization to the edge and build EXOs off the
And
edge.
the youngest people.
Ideally young, but they don't have to be young. The older ones, if you're older, you can take drugs. That really helps in loosening the brain.
I didn't hear this. You're also saying in your book that innovation sometimes implies even to force or break the laws.
Yes.
And you're talking about Uber. How far this can go?
Well, it's going to go pretty far because, for example, think about Uber. Uber is successful by deliberately breaking the law, leapfrogging the public acceptance and waiting for policy to catch up. Right? Not a very pleasant process, but it's working for them, and you can't argue with that. But you think about most areas like medical, healthcare, others. So today, for example, in the US, there's a medical robotics company that does robotic surgeries of knees, shoulders, etc. In the US, they're authorized to do knee surgeries, but not shoulder surgeries. But in Switzerland, the shoulder surgeries is authorized. So I have a friend that lives 1 kilometer from the factory in Silicon Valley where they make the robot. He flies to Switzerland to get his shoulder done because he can't do it in the US, right? So now this is an example where the law doesn't apply equally and people are doing medical tourism and doing other things to kind of break through old thinking. And Europe is typically very old in its thinking from a legislative, very conservative. And so people are doing stem cell injections and all sorts of other things. Therefore, we were routing around. The European Central Bank just came out a few months ago and said totally clearly, we will not be able to regulate cryptocurrencies, which is kind of an amazing admission. They're correct, but it's amazing they admitted it. So I'm very excited about that.
What a country like Romania must do in order to embrace the change and use technology to make people's life better?
I'm incredibly optimistic about countries like Romania. In the past, in the last few hundred years, it was a huge advantage to be a big country like Russia or the US or Brazil, because you had lots of abundance of natural resources, you had critical mass in multiple industries, and you could throw your weight around and create an empire, etc. But today, every major country, every big country in the world is in a mess. Right? China's a mess, Russia's a mess, the US is a mess, Brazil is a mess. Today, it's a huge advantage to be a smaller country because you're more adaptable. And if you're scientific and mathematically oriented, which you are, you have unbelievable opportunity to take on these new technologies and leapfrog the rest of the world. So I have a huge optimism for countries like Romania. And you just have to be crazy enough to do it, which I think you are.
Okay. I don't know. How do you know this?
I've hung out with enough Romanians to know this.
Good. Good to know. We were going to take some questions from the audience, so if you can just pass the microphone, please.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Adrian, and I have a question about democracy. How do you think we can upgrade democracy?
How do you upgrade democracy? I think there's two ways of doing it. I think one is it would be really easy to use AI to think about policy. If you scoured everybody's Facebook posts and Instagram feeds, you'd know pretty clearly what the immigration policy should be. You don't need to go through the filters of a representative trying to imagine it, then trying to formulate policy, etc. So we could use AI to kind of detect and track in real time. The second thing I think you can do is large representative democracies don't work. India's broken, Brazil is broken, the UK broke 2 years ago, the US breaking right now in front of our eyes. I think what we're seeing is a de-emphasis of nation states and increased emphasis at the city level. Cities are kind of where it's at today because of urbanization and other models. Cities are more self-sufficient. If you think about the biggest cities in the world today, Shanghai, Tokyo, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, they're bigger and more complex than almost any country was 100 years ago. It's too complex today to try and manage a whole country. So I think what we see is power granulating down to the city level where it's more manageable over time. So those are the two areas that I think there's some vectors for possibility. Does you have a follow-on?
Sure, follow-up. How about China's policy about democracy and face recognition and all this kind of stuff that goes a little bit beyond democracy, or it's democracy next level?
Yeah, so there the question is how much freedom should the individual have, right, versus the state. Right now, what you have is, in most cases, states and governments are using technology in a very negative way and spying on the people. US, China, Russia, etc. The China is just more overt about it, but everybody's doing the same thing. But what's starting to happen as we democratize technology, people are starting to take things into their own hands. And my favorite example of that is 2-3 years ago, there was the meteorite that hit Siberia. Remember that? And there's like 200 live video recordings of this 2-second event. And so people said, how did people whip out cell phones and take 200 videos of this recording? And it turns out all the Russians have dashboard cameras to protect against insurance fraud and corruption, right? And so now you're using, the people are using technology to defend themselves against the state. And that's kind of interesting. And this is why I'm optimistic about things like blockchain, Bitcoin, et cetera, we're going to route around government. It's going to take too long. It's going to be too slow for governments to legislate going forward. And that's going to break the equation. And now things will happen in a really interesting way going forward.
We can have another 2 questions, please.
I would like to ask you if the cost...
Wait, where are you?
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, there. Hi there.
Hello. So if the costs for production are going towards zero, how can we earn money in the future?
How do you earn money if the costs go to zero? So there's 2 or 3 things happening there. First is if the costs go to zero, let's say we drop radically the cost of healthcare, education, clean water, energy. Just energy costs going to near zero will free up think about this, the poorest countries in the world are the sunniest countries in the world, right? And so now somebody spending a huge amount of money on energy to power their cell phones can do that for free. But that means we have more money left over for other areas. I think what you're asking is, as we move the marginal cost of many things to near zero, how do we earn a salary? Is I think the question you're asking. Is that correct?
Somehow, yes.
So what we think we'll see there is there's a trend to what's called a universal basic income. So technology is delivering more and more productivity to the world. If you think about going back 1,000 years ago, we were all working 20 hours a day in the fields just to put 3 meals on the table. Okay? The amount of time needed to earn a livable wage has shrunk over time to a small amount today. Many of us work hard because we want to, not because we have to. Okay? In most industrialized countries. And so the amount needed to earn a livable wage will soon go to near zero as we automate the economy and technology delivers more productivity to the economy. And we think what will end up there is what's called a UBI, or a universal basic income. And so go research this. We've seen about 14 experiments run around the world very, very successfully. And the idea is you give a basic stipend to every single person, unrestricted, enough for them to survive but not be happy. So you still have a functioning economy, you still have a very thriving job economy, but now people can do more what they want. Entrepreneurship explodes, the creative acts explode, music explodes, et cetera, and we're going to get there. But how we get there from a labor, union, taxation, job environment to that is a huge leap. We don't have a lot of confidence in our political structures to get us there.
Let's take one more question, please.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello.
Last question?
Yeah, this is the last question.
I hope it's a good one.
One big question and a small question.
Okay.
So the big question, universities are taking a lot of the common resources, both in public and private funding, They didn't change so much during the last 25 years when I went to school. University was a place where we can get in touch with knowledge. They had libraries, they had expertise, but now we have internet, access to knowledge is very easy, but very little has changed in the universities, and they are still burning a lot of money. How do you see universities going forward 10 years from now? And the smaller question, I'm teaching computer science in a university, and where do you see computer science degree going 10 years from now?
Okay. Okay, so let me address education in general, not just universities. For the university itself, the model of a university has not changed, not just in 25 years. It's been about 450 years since in the last upgrade to a university. Okay, and I talk about immune systems. We have big immune systems in big companies that resist change. Public sector has a worse immune system because the existing policy is the immune system. The worst immune system ever is academia. Right? Just try and update academia and watch the fight that you get there. So the way you do this, the way you innovate around that is you don't try and upgrade the existing university. You create a totally new model off to the edge and let that become the new gravity center. So Singularity University, we created it outside. Even though we're in Silicon Valley of Berkeley, Stanford, we decided not to spin it out of one of those because you'll get this immune system problem. We created a totally separate entity, and it's now considered one of the top educational environments in the world because of that. The second reason that this is important is that if you're doing a master's degree today in any of these areas, like advanced robotics, biotech, neuroscience, today, literally by the time you finish your master's degree, you're out of date. Because our ability to teach the subject can't keep pace with the changes in the subject area. Okay? And so we've known this, say, in web development, you had to upgrade your skills every year, but now it's happening in a large basket of environments. And I'll tell you the most exciting thing I'm seeing. I mentioned GitHub earlier. GitHub is a platform where developers can collaborate, and they've implemented all 11 characteristics, gamification included. So if you're on GitHub, I can rate your code and you can rate my code, and I can give you a review rating on your code. It's been so successful that today, if you're a Silicon Valley software developer, your salary has no bearing on what university you went to, what degree you got, what grades you got. It's 100% what is your GitHub rating. So the value of a computer science degree just went to zero. So I'm not sure what you want to do about teaching a computer science class in that environment. But think about what happens to that when you apply that to doctors or lawyers or accountants and others. The value of a medical degree or a legal degree will go to zero over time because it will use a peer-to-peer rating. So all these top-down systems where some degree granting institution or the government blesses it, etc., will disappear in the wave of bottom-up environment. Uber, because of the rating system of drivers and passengers, is a self-regulating environment. You don't need governance in the same way. Right? And so really fascinating to see. And the thing that I'm most excited about the blockchain is that you can have governance without government, which is a really interesting place to go. And can I take 1 minute and just explain why the blockchain is so powerful? How many of you have looked into the blockchain in a little bit of detail? All right, if you haven't, please go look into it. Here's why this is so profound. There's a very old problem in computer science that's never been solved until this happened, which is called the Byzantine generals problem. And it's the story of Constantinople in the 15th century. 8 generals were circling the city trying to coordinate a siege, an attack. And so they were sending messages around this network. Who should go first? Who should attack first? Where should we attack? What time should we attack it, etc. Except 1 out of the 8 was a traitor, was a bad guy. So they could lose the element of surprise, send the wrong information, etc. And the generalized computer science problem became, how do you send a secure, trusted, authenticated message over a network when you don't trust the network? Right? Very difficult problem. 40 years computer science PhDs have been trying to solve that problem unsuccessfully until the damn blockchain. And on the blockchain, when you send a message, you have 100% guarantee that it was of the origination, it wasn't tampered with, wasn't double entered, can't be revoked, which is a magical thing in a digital world. And so the internet, which has been an open communication platform where we've tried with great difficulty to secure transactions, now we have the authentication layer. And any function or environment where you need third-party authentication, you will essentially be able to get rid of that. And almost all government services are saying, yes, you're the right age, yes, you have the building permit, yes, you have the fishing license, etc. Now we can move all of that to the blockchain. And so I'm incredibly excited about what this will entail for government services. Now, the big challenge is you try and say to a government, you're not authoritative about who has a driver's license, the blockchain will be, and the government, you'll see the immune system problem, because governments like to be in control. And that's where we need to break through the immune system problem, which is why we work on that particular problem. But I think the blockchain technology does as much to the world as internet technologies have, and even more. So I'm hugely optimistic and excited about it. And it totally changes education, because if I go do a degree, I can now register it on the blockchain. If I do courses, I can get micro-credentials, etc. If you went to university and learned a skill, the half-life of that skill used to be about 30 years, and now it's about 5 years. And so the metabolism is increasing. The idea that you go to university for schooling for 20 years and then you're productive in the world for 50 years is totally out of date. You need to ongoing education on a real-time basis, constantly upgrading yourself. Think about the idea that the most valuable colleagues and employees you have are the ones that learn the fastest, right? So that's why it's interesting. And
Salim.
really, thank you for, this is the really, I'm really excited about the title of this conference. This is how to think about upgrading yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being with
Nice
us.
to be here.
And you can buy his book from today. You can find it in Romanian, so you can find everything you want to know about the businesses. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much, Salim. I appreciate that.
Warning. The upgrade of your 100% potential is in progress. Do not disconnect. I repeat, do not disconnect.